Hello and welcome to Juliet and Lucy's Quiet Leadership Revolution, the podcast for senior and aspiring leaders who want to make their voice heard and their impact felt through thoughtful, reflective, confident leadership. People who want to lead by example, bring others with them, and who are ready to learn and adapt to deliver brilliant results. I'm Juliet Corbett.
And I'm Lucy Gower. Today we're going to talk about negativity bias. Negativity bias is something that impacts a lot of the clients that I work with. And I've got my own experiences of how negativity bias has really kind of stopped me in my tracks over the years. I think the first time I came across it, I was speaking at a conference, big room, like a few hundred people. And I know that I did a really good job. I know that the room felt good. I know that I delivered what I wanted to deliver. I wasn't perfect. Nothing's ever perfect. But you know that feeling when you've done a good job. And I was pleased. And people came up to me afterwards and asked questions, and people emailed me. And I felt really happy with the job that I'd done. And then I got sent the feedback. And I was right. I had the vast majority of people said, thank you, that was great. I learned a lot. I enjoyed it. All the things that you want to hear on feedback. And there was one person that put, don't wear your sunglasses on your head. It makes you look unprofessional. And that's all they put. And, that hit me. It really knocked my confidence. And I started to look into what was going on here a little bit more, because I'd had 70, 80 bits of good feedback. Couldn't tell you what a single one of those was, but 15 years later, I can still remember this one bit of feedback about not wearing your sunglasses on your head. That is negativity bias. That is holding onto more closely and with more importance any of the feedback that you receive that is negative, and almost discarding the positive feedback. And it gets in our way of progress. Juliet, have you had an experience where negativity bias has made an impact on you?
Yes. And interestingly, so I had a very similar experience giving a talk, and it was slightly smaller. It was more of a workshop than the one that you've just described. And I noticed in the room there was another consultant, and I knew them and they were lovely. But it threw me in the seconds before to realise there was another consultant in the room as I was doing this workshop. And in the feedback that I got afterwards, I got almost 100% of the people in the room gave feedback. And all of it was really, really positive, except one anonymous piece of feedback, which was simply some more real world examples would be useful. Really useful feedback, really constructive, something I could act on, something that I could, shift up next time relatively easily. It wasn't going to be a big piece of thing, advice to act on next time. But instead, in my brain, I managed to get this entire narrative in which that was obviously the consultant in the room who was criticising me, obviously, without any doubt. And of course, I have no evidence that that was the case at all. And even if it was, it wouldn't matter, because it was a useful, constructive piece of feedback. So thank you very much indeed. And instead, what I took away from that was this one thing of always give more real world examples. And I hold on to that to this day.
Well, there you
Luckily
go.
now,
you've just given a real world example. So
I have given a real world
example. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I love it. Exactly. But interestingly then, as the years kind of went on, and I realized that experience was still in my mind. And then I read a blog that you'd written, Lucy, about negativity bias, and realized that's what this is. And I think the similarity of the stories helped me to notice that that's what it was going on. But it led me to be fascinated by the research that you've done into this area and to be really interested in understanding more. So what's the kind of evolutionary reason for this? Why do we end up with this negativity bias?
Basically about survival. So our ancestors that survived were tuned in to spotting negatives, to spotting dangers. And because we are wired to look out for negatives, for dangers, for anything that is going to have an impact on our lives, health, well-being, we are oversensitive, not oversensitive, we are more sensitive to. So many hundreds of years ago, when spotting a danger might be spotting a wild animal or not eating the poisonous berries, now we're still heightened to negative feedback or criticism. Our brains still have the same response that it's a threat, and so we are more attuned to spotting it. And I think for me, I carried around this "don't wear your sunglasses on your head, you look unprofessional" feedback for years, actually. But just understanding that that is what was going on, I found massively helpful. So rather than a little bit like you going, I bet it was so and so, I bet it was that person at the back with their arms crossed, I have no idea who it was. And it literally doesn't matter. You can reframe it as that person may have had an intention of being helpful, likely that they did, and B, it's because the way that our brains are wired to be more reactive, responsive, and heightened to negative criticism. That's okay. It just makes me human. What I do with that next
Yeah,
is important, but it just was kind of a leveler for me to really understand that. And I know that most of my clients, we will have a conversation about this in one form or another, and it is helpful to understand where that has come from.
absolutely. So, given that it's a natural response, we're not aiming here to just stop it
No.
entirely. But if we're trying to manage it, or at least manage our response to that negative bias kind of reaction, what can we do so that we don't feel so bad about hearing these constructive feedbacks, or maybe even less constructive? Maybe it is out and out criticism.
Yeah, and this isn't about not giving people constructive criticism. Like feedback, candid feedback is really important for how we learn and grow. But I think if you're on the receiving end of some constructive feedback, my advice on that is to, if you have an emotional response to it, if you feel upset or hurt or defensive, is just to take a step back and acknowledge that that's happening, that that's going on. Sometimes it can help to take some breaths. And, as human beings, we respond first emotionally and then we kind of catch up rationally. So our response to anything is emotional first and then rational. Just acknowledge that that's what's happening, that's what's going on. Don't respond in the moment. Don't respond from a place of emotion. And then I think it's about acknowledging what is happening. I say to myself, okay, Lucy, what's going on here? Okay, I'm having an emotional response to this because it's a negative piece of feedback. Hang on a minute, this is negativity bias having a field day. Okay, let me get into a rational space and work through that. Do they have a point? Fair point?
Yeah.
In the case of the sunglasses on their head or on my head, yeah, maybe that's how they felt. But I don't feel like that. And that's also okay. So know that you have emotional response, take a step back. And when you're in a more of an emotional place, have a little bit of a reflection about, was that helpful or not helpful? Perhaps you talk to somebody else about it, but know that it's the negativity bias that has come into play.
Yeah.
And we have that because that's about survival and it's about protecting ourselves.
I think that's great advice, and there's so much in there to unpack. I think one thing that comes through is just being aware that this is what's happening is often enough.
Yeah.
Not always, and you
Yeah.
might still need to talk to others, etc. But just knowing that this is happening and being aware that firstly I'm feeling an emotional reaction, and then rather than kind of that triggering a crisis of confidence, allow that emotional reaction to be a trigger to, okay, so more reflection required. And then when you're feeling a bit
Yeah.
more settled, the thoughts are kind of settled down a bit more rational
Yeah.
in your thought process. What that's telling you is not, you couldn't handle the feedback. What that's telling you is there's some useful reflection to have around this. And then your framework of what's useful in this, like from a rational standpoint, now that the emotion is kind of drained away, or maybe even before it's fully drained. Sometimes you can engage the rational process while the emotions are still there, as long as you are still aware that that's the stage that you're in. And then understanding, okay, so if this is true, is this useful or not? And then is this actually true? Is it their perspective? Is it fact? Is it just an observation? And if you know who it's come from, because normally in most circumstances you would know the source of that feedback, although in our examples maybe it was more anonymous, understanding their perspective could be helpful as well in terms of what their view on life might be, what their attitudes and values and approach to professional life might be that might be different to yours.
Exactly. And I think the thing in there is that you have a choice of how you're going to process that.
Yeah.
Maybe they have a good point that you can respond to. Maybe you don't agree with that. Either's fine. That's your choice. But understanding that you're responding to it more than you respond to praise or really positive feedback, because that's how, as human beings, we are wired to be on alert for what we would have perceived in times gone by as danger.
So this also, I guess, has an impact for how we're operating as teams as well when we're working alongside others. So
yeah,
sometimes we're not the one receiving, but we're accidentally the one. Well, I should say actually either accidentally because it's not necessarily a thoughtful process, or through consideration and candor, actually giving constructive feedback to others that could be perceived as being negative.
Yeah.
So what can we learn from this, how we're working within a team?
Yeah, that's such a good point. There was some research by the Gottman Institute, and they looked into this ratio of positive to negative feedback. And their research showed that for every for every negative interaction, you needed 5 positive interactions in order to kind of break even, to counterbalance. And they talked about high performing teams had a ratio of between 5-1 and 6-1. So I think that if we're thinking about this in terms of how teams work, I think I'm not saying don't give feedback. Feedback is massively important to learning and to progress. But I think it's acknowledging the impact that feedback has when it lands with people. And if you give somebody, generally speaking, if you give one piece of negative feedback, knowing that 5 pieces of positive feedback counterbalance that, what does that look like for your consideration about what you feed back and when you feed it back? And I think having empathy about how that lands with the other person is really important, and giving the person a little bit of time and space to have to think about it, and a follow-up discussion. And I think the impact of always highlighting like this isn't quite right or you've done this wrong can have a big impact on people's confidence over time, and how they feel about their work. And that negativity bias can kind of put a real dampener on team dynamics. So, a healthy culture where there's an element of support and an element of challenge is a good thing. But understanding what negativity bias can do to how that lands, is important in terms of how you're saying it, and what you when and where and how you choose to feed things back.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that comes to mind, although it's not within the professional sphere at all, it is the kind of the theory around positive parenting as well. The idea that you need to give constant praise for good behavior, however little minute behavior that might be. And I know that when I've got 2 kids, and when I'm having difficulties sometimes, trying to set the boundaries for them, I overdo the positive praise, knowing that then when I say something around, actually that's not behavior that's going to be acceptable, it's actually then couched in an overall environment in which they feel secure and safe. Not entirely professional, but I think actually there's a lot of human psychology that's useful in that as well, actually, isn't there?
Yeah, it's exactly the same principles that you've just talked about. And there's something around making sure you're reinforcing the good behavior. So it's really easy to look, because we have a negativity bias, we're kind of wired to spot the thing that doesn't quite work, or the typo, or the mistake or the brand that's a bit off. It's really easy for us to spot that, and that's fine to feed that back. But it's also remembering to feed back all the positive stuff that is happening to even more deliberately than you would
Yes.
normally, or that you would naturally maybe, in exactly the
Yeah.
same way that you've
Yeah.
talked about. I think the other thing about the feedback, both of us got this anonymous feedback that arrived after the event. We don't know the intention of that feedback. So I'm, even if I assumed that it came from really good intentions, that somebody had written that on a form because they thought they were being helpful, it still hurt. If I'd have had a direct conversation about it or feedback on a form if they'd have written, I'm genuinely only putting this because I think that your presentation was really good and this is something that got in the way for me, but you don't have room on a
Yeah.
form
Yeah.
to do that. So we kind of have to second guess. So how that lands is we weren't set up, but it's very difficult to deliver constructive feedback in that mechanism that we've both been talking about, where it can land with the intention
Yeah.
that it was
And
meant.
so my next question actually was going to be around what impact this has for leaders. So obviously it's very similar to the advice you've just given for working within a team, but I think there's a slightly more consciousness that as a leader, knowing that you have a responsibility to set the tone of the culture in which you're working, and that idea of being able to
Yeah.
articulate your intention is probably a key part of that advice as well, then, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. A book that I really recommend in terms of feedback and feedback models is Radical Candor by Kim Scott. And part of the Radical Candor model is that when you are feeding back, that you've built a good relationship and rapport. So I suppose in the parallel world that you've talked of parenting, that you've built that relationship
Mm-hmm.
and rapport early on. And then it's about caring and with the intent and saying the intention of which you're giving the feedback. So therefore it lands well. And I suppose role modeling that as a leader, and again, whether you're leading a whole organization or leading within your own sphere of influence, to be able to role model that so that becomes just how everybody does feedback
Yeah,
here
absolutely.
can be really helpful.
The other phrase that actually has really helped me is the idea that feedback is a gift. The idea that as you're
Yeah.
receiving that, and then therefore proactively asking for more feedback is feels sometimes that you have to be quite brave to do it, but actually is a gift every single time. And especially if you've got what you've just talked about here, the ability to recognize negativity balance, the ability to acknowledge emotion if you receive that feedback and it's not 100% positive, and your ability to then sift through that in a more rational way to work out what's helpful and what you're just going to jettison because it's just not helpful, is all actually really, really important, isn't it? If you're going to increase the amount of feedback that you're requesting, you need to be ready. You need to be ready with this kind of knowledge.
Yes, you need to be ready, and you also need to kind of trust the people that you're soliciting it from, that they
Yes.
will provide it with the best of intentions in order to help you to learn and to grow. And I know that we'll have another episode that is specifically around this feedback dynamic. And I think within that, it's just been super helpful for me to understand and for my clients to understand too, that this bias really weights our emotion and attention to the things that we can improve on rather than spending time feeling good about and celebrating and acknowledging how far we've come and all the things that we are working towards that are going well.
And how many of us spend long enough doing that? Generally speaking, it's always on to the next thing, and it could always be
Yeah.
better. And
Yeah.
and not taking the time to really celebrate a success is an error. Really luxuriate in it and kind of
Yeah.
understand that that has a positive impact on your ability to perform and to lead as well.
Exactly. And if that piece of research about that 5-to-1 ratio is true, it makes acknowledging success, whether you're doing that on your own, just like writing your
Mm-hmm.
list of things that have gone really well that week out, or whether you do that as something more formally with your colleagues or with your wider organisation, that is part of that 5-to-1 balance of helping people to feel more confident in their abilities. So when that constructive feedback comes along, which is good, and that negativity bias takes hold, you are in a better place to be able to work through that and manage that than if some of that celebratory stuff doesn't happen because we don't have time, or it's a bit cheesy to do all this celebration.
Yeah, and it's interesting as you said that. The thing that came to mind for me was that that's a joint responsibility. So as a leader or a member of a high performing team, you have a responsibility to give that positive feedback to others, but also actually as individuals, we have a responsibility to listen and actually genuinely hear that positive feedback, and not to go straight into deflecting the attention onto somebody else, or it wasn't anything special, or it was all the preparation that so and so did, or I only was a small part of that success. Oh my goodness, all of the phrases that allow us to deflect the praise that's being offered to us. In fact, I was talking to a client earlier today in a conversation, and she'd received 2 separate pieces of really lovely feedback, beautiful feedback from people that she highly respected, different parts of the community that she works with. And she was talking about wanting to hold on to it, and she meant kind of hold on to it mentally, but we were talking about where she could physically put that so that she can also go back to it. And I told her about your idea of a book of truth. About the idea. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
So a book of truths is threefold. So it could be a real notebook, or it could be a file on your phone or on your laptop. And I do a lot of work with people who are driving change, and confidence is a thing that can take a bit of a knock. And so your book of truths is, first of all, your own feedback of the things that you're pleased with and proud of. Your list at the end of the week of the stuff that's gone well. It's also your list of things from other people. So, great job, you've got really good feedback, well done. You keep that as well. And then the third part is, how are you deliberately filling up other people's book of truths with deliberate feedback, which is harder, I think, when we're working remotely or working from home, or not all working at the same days and hours. Because in the olden days, you used to be able to walk past so-and-so's desk and say, oh, thanks so much. Oh, I saw you did that. Great job. Thank you. Now you kind of have to be a bit more deliberate about it. And knowing about negativity bias, how important is that we are more deliberate about it? So yeah, a book of truths is a great little tool to kind of keep your tank topped up, basically, and keep your confidence buoyant.
Yeah, and I love that final part. I hadn't remembered that when I was telling her, so I'll have to forward this episode to her. That idea that actually showing the gratitude to others is a way of filling up their cup, but at the same time, it also has that positive reinforcement in ourselves as well, doesn't it?
And also part of that culture around sort of saying thank you and deliberately filling up the book of truths is to the thing that you said earlier. We're really good at being able to shrug off, oh, it wasn't me, it was nothing, I do it too, you do it, I know you do it. But essentially, if someone says to you, great job, well done, and you reject that, you're rejecting them and the praise, and that can feel quite hurtful. So own it, where, like, again, a lot of what we talk about is a shift in mindset. But see, the next time that somebody gives you that well done and you go, oh, it wasn't me, or it was nothing, just hold off on that and just thank them for deliberately filling your book of truths.
So I did that exercise a couple of years ago, actually, where I stopped myself. I didn't allow myself to say anything other than thank you. That's the only 2 words that I allowed to leave my lips when somebody said something positive to me. And it broke the habit of always deflecting that. And I can't say it's always works and always gets through, but it's definitely better than it was as a result of just that tiny little tweak.
Yeah, well done.
So as we draw our time to a close, what is it that we want people to take away? What are the key things that they can do as a result of listening to this conversation?
So I think that there's something really important about just understanding that a negativity bias exists. It exists because it's about our fundamental survival, and that's okay. If you hear negative feedback and you have an emotional response to it, you're not on your own. It's because you're a human being and that's how you're wired, and sit with that. I think there's something important about how you deliver feedback and thinking about in the delivery of it, how it lands with others. And I think if you're working as part of a team, think about that 5-to-1 ratio. What are the things that you can do to make sure that people in the team are getting that 5-to-1 ratio? Is it books of truths for everyone? Or is it that you do something very deliberate about celebrating successes? Juliet, what are you taking away from this session?
So for me, it's a whole new, deeper understanding of negativity bias, why it's important. I think I've learned so much from you in this conversation. And actually, one of the things that we always said when we set up the podcast was that we are not always going to have the answers. So I'm learning from you on this episode. You might learn from me on others. And we want to learn from those people who are listening as well. So the most important thing that I'm going to ask you to do if you're listening is to give us feedback, because feedback is a gift. And we want your feedback, whether it's negative, positive, constructive, or otherwise. We want to hear from you. So what's resonated with you from our conversation this week, and any of the actions that you're going to take as a result, whether they work, whether they don't, we want to hear. And maybe we've missed something. Maybe there's something you're left with a question about, or you've got a different point of view, or another entirely new topic that you want us to cover in a future episode. We would love to hear your feedback. And as always, if you found this conversation helpful, please do share the episode with a friend as well. So thank you for spending this time with us. Don't forget that if we want to make our voice heard and our impact felt, we need to gift ourselves the space to think, the courage to lead, and the confidence to adapt. I'm Juliet Corbett.
And I'm Lucy Gower. We hope you'll join us next time for the Quiet Leadership Revolution.